Today we're talking about empowerment in all its entrepreneurial forms. Kerim Derhalli is the ultimate example of the philosophy we celebrate here in the Bet on Yourself community. His mantra is take charge, make change. Kerim Derhalli is the founder and CEO of Invstr, an award-winning financial education and investment app. Invstr's mission is to empower everyone to take charge of their financial future.
To me, the bottom line of the information revolution is the empowerment of the individual and reversing the way that information and power exists in the world. So our belief is that we're all natural investors and that we can all learn to invest in the same way we can all learn to play a sport or a musical instrument.
And hearing a little bit more about your story. But just as a fun way to get to know each other, I'd like to ask people, what did you think you wanted to be when you were a little boy? What was your original dream?
Oh, wow. I mean, that's interesting. I tell you what, my father wanted me to be a doctor because he thought that, medicine is a skill that's universal. So if you're a doctor, you can help people anywhere. I mean, we all have pretty much the same bodies. My mother's family were all lawyers, so she wanted me to be a lawyer. Now, the problem is I can't stand the sight of blood. I mean, I go weak with blood if I cut myself or something like that. So I would have been a terrible doctor. And I went into a law library when I was going up to check out universities. And I went into a law library and I saw all these people beavering away over these thick books. And I thought, oh no, I can't possibly face that. So I really disappointed both of them. Actually, I think my passion when I was growing up is I probably wanted to be in international relations or international diplomacy or something like that. And a very wise friend of my father, who was a very senior British diplomat, told me, look, the age of diplomacy is dead and this is 40 years ago, with the age of telephones and modern communications, the age of diplomacy was dead. And so I thought about other things that I could do in the international sphere, and that led me to banking. So that was the journey.
Amazing. I think you, like I, were a fairly serious child. I was always very studious.
Well, my original thing I wanted to be when I grew up was either a ballerina or an Olympian. Didn't matter which sport, just wanted to be an Olympian in general. And then I quickly pivoted to academic, like by the age of 6 or so. I thought it'd be really cool to be a professor. So I think you and I were probably similar type of kids. Kerim, one of the things I love most about your story is how varied your background is and how you've drawn inspiration from so many different sources and places on this earth. So to get us started, I'd love to hear, maybe there's an influential person in your life, somebody who kind of inspired the way in which you wanted to contribute to the world. So maybe you can start us on that path of someone who has inspired you.
So sure. I think, the stories that inspire us, I find, are the stories of people who succeed, and, that we can aspire to be like them. And particularly, the stories of people who succeed against all odds. And so the story that's probably inspired me the most is the story of a man who, when he was still a teenager, got a scholarship to go and study in a different country. And so he travels abroad, and while he's abroad, he loses his home. He loses not only his home, but his family, and in fact, his entire country. And so he found himself all alone, penniless and stateless, thousands of miles away from what used to be his home. And so, what did he do? Well, what he did is he rebuilt his life. He started again, he worked hard, he finished his studies, he borrowed money to get the train ticket to his first job interview, worked hard at that, fell in love, had a family, and managed eventually to give his children the most amazing education that really anyone can. And, that man was my father, and he gave me a lot more than just an amazing education. He gave me a fundamental and an enduring belief in people and what people can achieve. And it's really become, my mission in life to help people achieve, to become the best that they can be, no matter what circumstances they find themselves in.
An incredibly inspiring story. And I think it gives so many people hope that you don't have to come from this. I think people have one idea of what an entrepreneur or what a success comes from, that pipeline, of what that pipeline looks like. And your family story is such a beautiful inspiration that success and inspiration and impact in the world can come from anywhere, from any person of any origin. With that kind of setting for your life and your family, you then yourself have had all kinds of adventures that have taken you to living all over the world. Maybe you can walk us through some of those early inspirations in the different parts of the globe that have informed the leader that you are now.
So I guess when I was, really young, as a young boy, I traveled seamlessly between cultures. I went to, boarding school at a very, very young age. My parents were living abroad. And, my own background, I come from a mixed ethnic, cultural, religious background. So, and then I was very lucky that in my personal life and my working life, I got to live in Europe, obviously in the UK, which is where my home is right now. But I've lived in the US several times. I've lived in the Middle East. I've lived in Singapore. I've lived in Tokyo in Japan. And then in my working life, I've traveled, I think I've calculated to over 60 countries around the world. So for me, it's just been absolutely fascinating to have that diversity of experience. And it's given me a real, I think, appreciation and understanding of the value of diversity. The people that you meet in the world, the people who've got diverse backgrounds tend to be the most interesting. I mean, they've got the different stories to tell. And so I've just become a huge believer in diversity. And it's something that it's one of our core principles at Invstr, is that we like to hire, diverse people. And we like to think of diversity in as broad a sense as possible. So people think, typically in terms of diversity from a cultural agenda point of view, but I like to think of diversity also in terms of experience and skills and attitudes as well. And what I found throughout my working career is that when you bring together diverse teams, it's like maybe the right analogy is like cooking or something. It's like having those different ingredients or spices or whatever. You can create just the most amazing outcomes. So diversity has been just a really important source of inspiration. I mean, I'm lucky because I experienced it, naturally. It came to me naturally. It was kind of the environment I grew up in. So for me, it's almost a given. And as you get older, you realize just the value and the power of some of these things. So diversity is a really important element for me.
I think that's one of the things that attracted me to you as a leader originally. You and I met while I was a judge at the Go Tech Awards last year and won Entrepreneur of the Year. And I think that was one of the things that stood out to me in our very, very first conversation was this thread of diversity and inclusion and inspiration from all kinds of sources. The people you've attracted to coming into Invstr really reflect your core values in a way that I find really rare and very inspirational for what a lot of companies are now waking up to during this year of the global conversations that are going on of the benefits and the highlights of diversity and inclusion. So before I get ahead of myself into this beautiful team that you've built at Invstr, I wonder if you could maybe walk us through your origin story. You were a banker, you were on Wall Street for 30 years, you had this maybe more traditional work experience the first half of your career. Can you walk me through this mental shift that you had, what made you brave enough to step out of that seemingly safe environment and take a chance on yourself as an entrepreneur and create something from scratch?
I think that's the most important thing. And, I used to get lots of people would come to me for career advice and they say, what should I do? And I'm unhappy. And I'd say, never make a change because you're unhappy. I think it leads to, it doesn't end well. You've got to be attracted by positive things. So, but to go back to your question, I was super lucky. I spent 30 years as a banker. I started in 1983 at JP Morgan and ended up 2012 at Deutsche Bank. And over that time, the financial services industry went through, just the most remarkable transformation. And it was driven by two main trends. It was driven by deregulation and an increase in leverage. And those two things drove massive increase in activity and volumes in the growth of the hedge fund industry. It drove tremendous product innovation as well. And then it also drove an expansion around the world as kind of capital markets were exported around the world. I remember in 1987, I was trading French government bonds, and France was an emerging market. The French capital markets were really nascent and it was considered an emerging market. And I had to persuade central banks in the UK and other parts of Europe and Scandinavia that it was actually safe to invest in French government bonds. So the world, and then we saw the expansion into Asia and Middle East, Latin America. So it was an absolutely amazing time to be involved in financial services, and I was very lucky. I think what the crisis in 2008, 2009 really brought all of those trends not only to a halt, but actually sent them into reverse, because we had re-regulation, deleveraging, and that product innovation kind of went out the door and was replaced by product simplicity. There was global retrenchment, people kind of came back home. So all of those trends stopped, but something else very, very powerful was going on in the background, and that was the information revolution. And we could talk about that for hours, but to me, the bottom line of the information revolution is the empowerment of the individual and reversing the way that information and power exists in the world. So I was realizing that there was this really powerful emergence of the information revolution was leading to the potential to empower people. And I realized that the financial services industry, the way it was being done, it had become over-leveraged and too remote, and it had lost its way. It was disconnected from its true social purpose, which was really ultimately the intermediation of savers and investors, right? Bringing capital from people who have it to people who need it. And it had become too introverted, too focused on risk-taking, and too remote from its social purpose. And what I realized is that there were three technologies that emerged as a result of the information revolution: cloud, social media, and mobile. And I realized that those were the perfect set of technologies actually to remake financial services and to reconnect financial services with the common good and the common purpose, which is about empowering people to take charge of their financial future. And that was really the idea behind Invstr, was to use this new set of technologies to enable people, to give people access, and to make financial markets, in particular in the process of investing, a lot more inclusive than it had become.
That's one of the things that I love most about Invstr is it does feel very empowering. It gives you a safe space to both learn and experiment, and it does feel very inclusive. In fact, at the beginning of lockdown back in March, I had flown from Europe to the States to speak at a conference, which was canceled while I was in the air. Ended up having to do lockdown for 9 weeks with my family in Seattle because Spain had since closed its border and I couldn't return home. And so my nephew, who was then 14, just now turned 15, was asking my sister, his mom, about investments. He was very curious about stock markets and learning. And I was in the car when he was asking her these questions, and I said, "Oh my gosh, William, I have the thing for you. We have Invstr." And now my 15-year-old nephew and I are now playing in fantasy finance on the Invstr app. And so if it can include me, somebody who's, I'm 42, and my 14-year-old nephew, if it can speak to both of us and train both of us, I think that's the very definition of inclusion, if the two of us are playing and learning together. There's so many ways we could dive into that, but I wonder if we can go into, while I want to really get back to the foundation of how you took this leap into entrepreneurship after a more traditional business model, I am curious if you can first talk about the why, the who, and the what of Invstr, and what you're really trying to solve in this very empowering and inclusive environment you've created.
So I think there's a very big why, and I'll start with that. And to me, we face two massive problems as a society, and one is talked about a lot, and the other is hardly talked about at all. And I think one is climate change, and the other is financial sustainability. And my belief is that financial sustainability is as big a threat to society as environmental sustainability is to the planet. And what we've been doing for the last, as long as I've been working or been aware, really economically aware, what we've been doing as a society is borrowing and spending. And when you borrow and spend, what you're doing fundamentally is stealing from the future. And you're leaving the next generations to pick up the bill, and that the worst news is that since the so-called debt crisis of 2008-2009, which was created by excess debt in the world, what we've done is we've magnified it. So we've actually borrowed 80% more since 2008-2009 than we'd accumulated in our entire civilization's history. So debt has absolutely exploded, went from about 140 trillion to I think over $250 trillion globally. This is a global problem. And that's a little bit the analogy I use. It's a little bit like telling an alcoholic, sending an alcoholic to the liquor store for a cure. You don't solve a debt problem by taking on more debt. And I think there's, I describe it as almost the biggest intergenerational theft in human history, because we're saddling the millennials and the Gen Z with, all of this debt that they're going to have to pay off in some shape or form. And so how do you address that problem? Well, the obvious answer is by investing, because when you invest, you take from the present, you take from today's consumption, and you invest in the means and ways that are going to help to pay off that debt in the future. So investing is the answer to this massive problem. And then when you look at, okay, who's meant to do the investing? Well, governments are doing the opposite, right? Governments are disinvesting, and they're the biggest culprits. And actually, since the COVID crisis, they've been doing it even more. So, and maybe rightly, but the problem is getting worse. Companies are the other people that you would hope would be investing in our future. And what companies have been doing, for the most part, and I'm going to generalize massively here, but for the most part, what companies have been doing is they've been doing financial investing. So they've been borrowing money, and instead of investing in real capacity, they've been buying either their own shares or they've been doing M&A and buying other people's shares. And that adds zero productive capacity to the world. So that just leaves us, that leaves you and me and everyone else to do the investing. And the problem, so that's really the why, is we need to increase the level of investment if we're going to have a sustainable future and society isn't going to disintegrate. And then the problem is, okay, well, how do we do that? And the financial industry did an amazing job for decades telling people that they were fundamentally incompetent and that they should leave the process of investing to so-called experts who, by the way, consistently underperform the markets year in, year out. But obviously, it's a very, very self-serving argument because the financial industry is still getting paid a huge amount of money to manage other people's money, however unsuccessfully they're doing it. And so what that has resulted in is most people are afraid of investing. They lack the confidence and the knowledge to become investors. And so the problem that we set out to solve at Invstr is to help people acquire the confidence and the knowledge and the wealth ultimately to become successful investors. And we think these are, really, really important problems to solve.
I think you've done an amazing job at addressing very, very big, complicated problems and bringing it down to the individual empowerment. Before we get into the details of the app, and I really want to walk through this amazing journey and the new features you're consistently adding and the way that you're bringing that into the individual's hands and homes. I'm curious, as coming from the banking background, how did you create the model of this company that could then do, what you've really just described is literally changing the world. So how did you prep yourself to financially change global attitudes towards finance and economics? What was your model for business planning in creating just the structure of the company so that you could then accomplish this mission individually?
It's a great question. Since I've been very fortunate over my career. I got to build and manage several businesses. You could say I wasn't able to hold a job down, but I had so many different experiences, probably built and ran 15 or 20 different businesses over my career in different parts of the world. And going all the way back, I think to, when I was in Tokyo in Japan in the late 1980s, I built this model of how to, write a business plan and run a business. And it's a model that I've used ever since, and it's worked in every single situation that I've been in. So, for me, it's worked, and I hope it helps other people. And the model splits down really into two parts. There's the kind of the business planning piece, and then there's the execution piece. And the business planning piece has four components. One, vision. What is happening in the world? What are the major trends? And how is the future going to evolve? So having a view of what's going on in the world is always my starting point. The second step is what I call mission. Given that world view, what is the role that you or your organization wants to play in the world? The third step is strategy. What are the things, what are the tools, the techniques that you're going to put in place to create the competitive advantage or the comparative advantage to succeed and to do well in that environment? And the fourth step is objectives, because we have to hold ourselves true in a sense. So what are the quantitative objectives that you want to succeed that will tell you I'm doing well or I'm doing badly against that mission and deploying the strategy. So that's the first step. The second step is, how do I execute? Okay, given that's my plan, then what do I need to do? And my strong view is everything starts with clients. If you've got, and I say that as someone who's really been on the product side of the business all my career, but I recognize that everything has to start with clients, understanding who they are, who you want to reach out to, what their needs are, and how you're going to reach them, how you're going to appeal to them, how you're going to reach them, how you're going to touch them. And so it all starts with clients. So defining that is really important. Then you say, once you know what clients' needs are, then you can say, okay, what products and services specifically am I going to offer them? And then that's the core of your business plan. And then the last kind of three steps in the execution piece are, okay, if those are the products and services I want to offer to that set of clients, what systems do I need to have in place to be able to achieve that? What human resources do I need to have in place to achieve that? And then the last step is, okay, given all of that picture, what are the outcomes going to look like in terms of a pro forma revenues and costs? And then that's the complete business model. So it starts with a vision, ends up with kind of, things that are very, very practical. What's the bottom line going to look like?
I think that 9-step plan that you just outlined is so helpful to a lot of people out there who might be in a more of a traditional 9-to-5 job and have a big idea that they want to implement but don't know how to get started. There you are. 9 easy steps to starting your own company. for people who aren't yet familiar with Invstr, maybe you can walk us through what exactly the product is that you ended up building to accomplish that mission that you've just described, and maybe walk us through some of the big pivots that you've had along the way. If there's any theme to 2020, it's been massive pivot. Everyone has been changing not only their life and their routines, but their business models and adapting to this new normal. So walk us through your core product and the way that might have changed or pivoted along the way.
Okay, so look, the essence of Invstr is that we want to make it fun and social for people to learn, and easy for people to learn how to invest, and then to be able to actually start investing in an affordable way. So our belief is that we're all natural investors, and that we can all learn to invest in the same way we can all learn to play a sport or a musical instrument. So we start off with really the game, because there are really two challenges when it comes to investing. Or there's a first challenge when it comes to investing. And the first challenge is that sense of lack of confidence, that fear. So if you can make it fun and exciting, then you help people overcome that fear and to build the confidence and to realize that actually the process of investing is very, very straightforward. You've got to buy something low and sell it high. And if you can do that consistently over a long period of time, you're a great investor. So we built a game called Fantasy Finance. The reason that we called it Fantasy Finance is actually it's very similar conceptually to fantasy sports. There are tens of millions of people who play fantasy sports. And if you can help people build a bridge between what they know and what they don't know, then that's, I think, a great way of helping people learn. So it's a familiar format. Fantasy Finance, you get to manage $1 million of fake money. And you compete in our Investor Fantasy League for real cash prizes. And as you're playing the game, it gives you the opportunity to experience all the thrill and the excitement of the financial markets without having to risk any real money. And as you're playing, you naturally learn some of the core principles, the essential principles of investing, that investing is about generating a return on your capital. It's not just about making dollars and cents. And in order to do that, it helps to be diversified and not to overtrade. Because when you overtrade, you burn the other capital, which is really essential, which is your emotional capital. So diversification helps you preserve your financial capital. Not overtrading helps you preserve your emotional capital. And that way, you help to be, you start to learn to become a better investor. So the game is a great icebreaker. It's a lot of fun. People tell me it's addictive. We've had 750,000 people play the game. We get about 1 million trades going through the platform every month. So that's the first step.
I can confirm that it is very fun and very addictive. This is what my nephew and I consumed during the initial stages of lockdown, which was a very fun time to be using Invstr because there was such crazy things happening in the market, honestly, which is not indicative of the normal behavior of the stock market. So that was an interesting time for us to get started. But yeah, walk us through how you've pivoted and where you see a lot of this engagement. You're getting incredible engagement at the moment. Where are most of your users coming from?
So look, we focused almost exclusively on North America as a core marketplace, but today we're getting 100% organic acquisition. So we've done no marketing this year. So it's all word of mouth, which is fantastic. The other thing that's great, we enable people to come together in mini communities within the larger investor family. So, maybe with your nephew, you've created a private league. And so we've had about 70,000 of these private leagues created. We've got, parents and kids, creating private leagues. We've got college professors, MBA professors, creating leagues with their students. We had a VC firm actually that was even using a private league to share ideas amongst themselves.
Amazing.
And we've got high school kids. We've got a whole network of high school kids called Cash Club, who've created private leagues. So a lot of the engagement is coming socially, because I think the social features that we have on the app, the direct messaging, the private leagues and the social feed, that's also a big draw. And then the other thing that's helping us attract people is the Academy. So the Academy is just Invstr Academy. It's a great place for people who really start with no knowledge. We say go from kind of zero to hero. It's a great step-by-step learning course. So our focus has been on the educational side, really providing people with the best environment to learn on their own in academy, to learn, on a peer-to-peer basis through the social features, to learn in a kind of live market environment playing the game. And obviously it's, we now want to migrate away from just purely the educational side to more the transactional side. Because when I think of empowerment to me is really three things. It's education, it's resource, and it's opportunity. And the analogy I use is, if I want someone to eat spaghetti bolognese, I've got to give them the recipe and the ingredients and a kitchen to cook it in. So what we've built so far is kind of the education, is the recipe. We also provide a huge amount of data and information. And the next big part of our evolution as a business is kind of creating the kitchen, or the real, in financial sense, the place where people can buy and sell equities, they can buy and sell crypto, they can manage their money seamlessly. So that's the piece that's going to be coming out next, is really building that last piece so that investor can be that complete journey from knowing nothing about the markets to being fully empowered and in a place to manage all of your money in one secure, convenient place.
I think that was one of the biggest surprises to me as a new adopter of Invstr, a new user, was how much fun the education part was for me. I thought I had a fairly good understanding of the market. I worked in Silicon Valley my entire career. This is a regular part of my daily vocabulary. But I really learned in an in-depth way and a really addictive way. I found myself at night, instead of scrolling social media, doing the academy. And I hadn't expected that. I thought the fantasy finance part would be the most addictive, but I found that true on the education side as well. You touched on earlier that, so a lot of your adopters were originally from North America, but it is global. I, as an American, now living in Europe, almost December will be 3 years that I've been living here. I've noticed a big difference in understanding or even interest in investing. For Americans, our parents have done it. It's something offered to us as part of our benefit packages with employers. But in Europe, there's less of an adoption rate. There's much more traditional investing, maybe in property or physical things that you can touch and see. I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of your adoption outside of US. And I think this education part might be a great starting point, because my husband is Spanish, and so we're talking about our long-term investing for our future and for retirement. And all of his comfort area is within that more traditional investment space of properties and buildings and that kind of thing. And I am very much into just diversifying my stock portfolio. Can you walk me through, maybe help the two of us come to somewhere in the middle of an understanding of how a European might become more comfortable with this investment space?
Okay, I think you're right. There are enormous differences in the way that Europeans and Americans approach risk and risk taking, and how that's reflected in portfolio management. And you're absolutely right. Portfolio selection in Europe has tended to be a lot more in terms of property and even fixed income to some extent, whereas in the US there's a much stronger equity culture. And I think that might, if you think about America as a nation was built and has been, managed by entrepreneurs. People who took risks to sail across the ocean, for the most part. That story is changing over time, but for the most part, that's how America was built. And it's built on a risk-taking culture, and people who want to, progress and build wealth. Whereas in Europe, Europe's been around a lot longer, and I think the European investment culture is a lot more around capital preservation and wealth preservation, through families or industries or whatever, and less about risk taking. So there's definitely a more entrepreneurial culture. I did a series of lectures actually at a number of European and US colleges, and there's just a massive difference. You go to an investment society in, let's say, in the UK, and these are bright students who want to learn, and they're learning because they know it's the right thing to do. You go to a college in the US, and the kids are all there, part of an investment club, and they're already managing part of the university or the college's endowment. So they're in the markets, they got their hands dirty, and the level of sophistication is so much greater. And that's where that's where we decided to really focus on the North American market, because we thought that the early adopters were going to be there. We still get, a lot more. We still get about half of our audience globally. We're in 224 countries today. So we still have, global participation, but 50% is North America. In terms of investment portfolios, I think, we're in a really, really tough position at the moment, right? The world, with interest rates effectively at zero, value's gone, right? We don't have, if you go to classical capital asset pricing theory, you look at what's the risk-free rate and then what's the risk-free rate that you add on top to discount future cash flows. We can't do those exercises anymore because the risk-free rate is zero and it's artificially set. When the Fed dumps literally trillions of dollars of liquidity into the system, it distorts the price of money. And when the price of money is distorted, we don't have just properly constructed discount rates to evaluate long-term assets. And that's part of the reason actually why I think real investment has collapsed. It's one of the unintended consequences of quantitative easing is that we no longer invest. So trying to figure out what are the right investments in this environment, I think is really, really hard. I mean, property is probably going to get a little bit cheaper now, given the crisis and everything else. But property certainly has a role to play. Fixed income, in Europe, fixed income rates are negative in a lot of places. So it's really hard to justify investing in fixed income. And equity markets have bounced back so strongly that it's kind of, that's where the action is. And I think, in a zero interest rate environment, equities are going to be the place to remain. So I think that's probably, you would probably want to skew a little bit more towards the equity side than the fixed income side. But it's a really hard environment to be an investor in right now.
Yeah, it's so complicated. And I think that's touching people's lives in very, very real ways right now. Maybe in our old normal, we could kind of ignore markets and feel a little independent to global trends. But at the moment, that is not the case. All of us are very aware of that we're part of a cog in this very large wheel. And I really appreciate you bringing this semblance of empowerment back to people when we need it the most through Invstr and what you're building. I'm also intrigued by many of the principles you've just introduced that I think apply to entrepreneurship and leadership as well. Some of this, I'm curious about the two sides of your brain. You're trained in thinking, so that's the very logical, calculated side. And as an entrepreneur, you obviously have a tolerance for risk-taking, for calculated risk-taking, and taking a chance on a big idea and kind of stepping off the ledge a little bit and doing things differently than anyone's done before. And I'm also seeing not only in tolerance for risk in terms of investing, but as an American in Europe and in my work with my clients here, I'm also seeing a difference in the way in which European entrepreneurs face their work, or investors, their different tolerance for risk in Europe versus in the States. For you, as a European entrepreneur, can you walk me through this maybe tug of war mentally that comes as being an entrepreneur in Europe, but having to step into this big risk-taking side of yourself?
Look, I think you need to operate in two modes. You've got to have a vision. You've got to have a big vision of what's going on in the world. And you need that vision because entrepreneurship is not easy, right? There are times when we go through down moments, and if you don't have a vision, and I would say even more than a vision, if you don't have a strong purpose, it's that strong purpose that actually is going to keep you going. You've really got to believe in what you're doing, because that's what's going to keep you going when times are tough. You also need that strong purpose when you're managing a team of people, because I think, one of the most powerful things is, yes, to empower people individually and to get diverse people on board, but you want them to collaborate around that strong purpose. And if you've got a strong purpose that people believe in, it makes managing a team of people so much easier. And I think you also need a strong purpose when it comes to clients and customers, because I think increasingly these days, I think there's so much change going on in the world that I think we don't really fully appreciate. But there's also a massive generational change in terms of attitudes towards companies and their role in the world and profit maximization. And I'm convinced that millennials and Gen Z in particular want to align themselves with companies that have strong social purpose at their core. And I think the old normal was companies profit maximize, and then they give back afterwards. And I think the new normal is that companies have to give first and have to be seen to be contributing to society to gain the acceptance of the consumer base, particularly the younger consumer base, and then they can make money as a consequence of that. So I think everything really fundamentally is being reversed. So you've got to have, you've got to have that vision, you've got to have that sense of purpose, and then you also need to get on with stuff, right? Because there's absolutely no point having a vision and a purpose and not getting anything done. I mean, I've got a list of 100 things I need to get done, and so you've got to, in some sense, compartmentalize and say, okay, enough dreaming and enough scheming and all the rest of it, and then you've got to get on and execute, and you've got to be very disciplined in terms of how you do it. So I think I'm lucky. I think I have the ability to move between kind of the big picture and the detail. And teams need to have that ability. You need to have people who can think big, and you also need to have people who can address the detail and get things done. And having that mix of skills and attitudes in a team, I think, is really, really important.
I really appreciate the team that you've built. I've been privileged to meet a few of your employees and see ways in which they contribute really uniquely. I would love to hear more about your philosophy as a leader in your hiring and how you identify talent. What you're building is something that hasn't existed before. And so you're really looking for people with the intelligence, with a knowledge base. But I think you've also hired for this grit factor, the people who are fast learners, who can then take their knowledge base and pivot into a new application. And I wonder if you can also talk me through your perspective on these millennials or Gen Zs, who are your primary users at the moment. I think that's your largest growing base, and ways in which you're formulating or maybe pivoting some of those traditional business models to fit this new market. So I'd love to hear more about your team and the way in which you're using that team to anticipate the needs of this newer generation coming online.
Okay, so we have a range of we have a very diverse team, as you would expect. We have a range of age, we have a range of experience, we have a range of gender. I'm delighted, actually, outside our development team, we're, I think, almost 70% female to male, which is something I'm kind of proud of. I think when you look at the overall mix, we're probably about 40% female. So what we have, gender, culture, we have people in the States, we have people in Europe, we have a large development team in Istanbul. So we've got a very, very diverse team. My attitude towards the team and kind of the three values that we have as a company are individual empowerment, it's diversity and collaboration. And we really try and collaborate in a meaningful way. And what that means is people need to give up their ego. There's no place for ego. I was musing about the difference between collaboration and cooperation. People who have self-interest and whose self-interest aligns with someone else's self-interest can cooperate. People who genuinely want to collaborate need to ignore their self-interest and subjugate their self-interest to the higher good or the higher purpose. And so there's a fundamental difference. And so if you want to build a genuinely collaborative team, then you've got to find people not only with the right skills and talents that you need, and we need, tremendous diversity of talents in the digital, all the way through the stack, whether it's from the design to the coding, to the project management. We need all of that, all of those digital skills. But what you really need is the right attitude. People without ego who are willing to collaborate, genuinely collaborate, who respect each other and genuinely willing to collaborate. And when you're able to achieve that, and it's taken us a while, and I'm absolutely thrilled with the team of people that we have today. It takes a while because I've probably made some bad hiring mistakes, bad hiring decisions, and I've brought on people who probably didn't quite fit that mold, but over time you're able to shape the team and evolve it. To create this genuinely collaborative environment. And that culture, I believe, translates into the product. And so when you look at the reviews that we get as a product, the thing that, people love the game, they love playing the game, they love the academy. We've had over 50,000 people go through the academy. But the thing they love is the community that we've built. And that open collaborative sense that you get when you participate in the community, either in the private leagues or in the feed. And I mean, police is the wrong word. We actively engage ourselves in the community. We probably about a third of our team are actively involved and participate in the community on a daily basis. And we're trying to shape the culture. And what we've tried to do is to create an environment, a social environment where no one is afraid to ask a question, where people actually, leverage the power of the community to help them. And people say, look, I've bought this, what should I do with it? I don't know where to start. I'm stuck on this thing. And it's amazing. Yes, we try and answer those questions, but it's amazing how many other community members now get involved and support each other and help each other. So we have this, we've created this big collaborative sense of purpose about, helping everyone learn how to invest no matter what stage they're at. And that's what gets reflected in the reviews that we have. And I mean, that's the thing I'm most proud of, really.
I think it comes through in such a purely authentic way, not only in your corporate culture, but it permeates the entire app and all of the products that you're building at the moment. It is very safe space, especially when it's easy to be intimidated as a new investor, a new user, but to walk into an environment that's so collaborative and embracing there are no stupid questions is really, really unique, especially in social applications these days. To have that safe space, to have those conversations is really striking. I can't say enough good things about what you built. Really, I could go on for hours and hours. And I think that's something that everyone needs right now. I mean, 2020 has been so disheartening for so many. We felt so powerless. We've literally been locked down and restricted in our usual freedoms and decision makings. And to have something that gives us that semblance of control again is a beautiful gift to be putting out into the world. And I am curious for you, as we're wrapping up 2020, we've got just a few months left at the time of this recording. I'm curious what's giving you hope as you look into your 2021 and beyond. Is there a theme or a project or something that's giving you some enthusiasm and hope and looking forward to the future?
Look, I'm an optimist by nature, so I try and see the best in what's going on in the world. But there are three things that I would say I'm genuinely excited about. And the first thing is the information revolution, because the information revolution is empowering people in a way that we've never been empowered before. So, and I think when, the end result of having, billions of people empowered, genuinely empowered with access to information and access to each other, and ultimately through the blockchain, the ability to transact seamlessly and trustlessly, with each other, I think that's going to unleash human potential in a way that we've never been able to achieve. It's kind of Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nation on steroids, taken down to the individual level. So that just gives me, I think, we're going to unlock human productivity in a way that's absolutely unimaginable. The second thing that gives me great hope is what's going on in the energy space. I'm not an expert on this, but you look at what's going on in the energy space, and we're getting closer to the day where we're going to have free, pollution-free energy. And so imagine a world in which energy is limitless and it's free and it's clean. So that we're getting closer to that. I mean, there's a lot of work that's going on in China and in the West in terms of producing free energy. So I think the energy revolution, I think, is something also to be very, very excited about. And the third thing is the health revolution. I mean, it's just amazing the advances that are going on in medical science and our ability to diagnose and to cure and to it's going to create a different kind of problem in the form of longevity, but it's, I think that's an incredible revolution. So I look at all these three things and I'm just very, very optimistic about the future. I mean, really optimistic about the future. I think the biggest challenge that we face as a civilization is to find the things that are common in us and to unite again around the things that are common, and to find the values and the principles that we can all sign up to. That, I think, that's the thing. That if you ask me really what would my next project ideally be, it's that. It's if we can create that common set of beliefs and principles that unite the world and help, take our civilization to the next level. That's something I'd love to be able to do.
Incredible. I think that's such an inspiration, and thank you for giving us multiple areas in which we can place our hope for the future when the future at the moment seems a little dark and out of our control. I think you're right. There are some incredible advancements, and they all come from this collaborative environment. When we work together for a common cause, we can change the world. It's not just a Silicon Valley cliche. We really can come together to have some big impact and be a voice in the decisions being made at the moment. This has been incredible. I could talk to you for hours and hours. I imagine all of our listeners also have more questions and more things they'd love to learn from you. What's the best way for them to connect with you, to continue to learn from your ideas, and to be part of the investor community?
So look, I'm reasonably active on LinkedIn, so please connect with me on LinkedIn. I mean, if you really want to get hold of me, then download the Invstr app and DM me. There are no blocks. Literally anyone in the world can download Invstr and send me a direct message on Invstr, and I will respond. So, but connect with me on LinkedIn. Follow obviously the Invstr journey on Twitter, Invest Streams on Facebook and Instagram. But yeah, best thing to do is download Invstr and send me a direct message, and I will gladly respond. Alternatively, email me kareem.derhalli@investorinvstr.com.
Incredible. Thank you so much for spending this morning with us. Thank you for all the wisdom and the hope and the inspiration for future. And for all of our listeners out there who are entrepreneurs like you, who are betting on themselves right now, thank you for sharing your knowledge and the way in which you've built this incredible company. So thank you, Kareem. Thanks for your time this morning.
No, thanks so much, Anne. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Bet on Yourself podcast. If you're like me, you have a lot of new insights and ideas of things you want to implement from this episode. Don't worry if you were listening to this while walking the dog or putting a baby to sleep or driving and didn't have hands free to take notes. We've done the hard work for you. Check out the show notes here in your podcast app or on my website, annehyatt.co, for additional resources. While you're there, you can also sign up for my newsletter, which always supplements these podcast themes with additional free resources. May I ask for a quick favor? Please click on that follow or subscribe button here in your podcast app so you don't miss an episode, and give us a 5-star rating. I'd love it if you'd also share this via your social media with your friends and tag me so that I can see what resonated with you, who you would like to hear on future episodes, and what topics are on your mind. We'll be back next week with even more content to support you in your big bets. I'll see you then. See you then. See you then. See you then. See you then.